Hello and welcome to the big picture. The state of Indian banks, especially the public sector banks, have been a matter of serious concern for a few years now. Growing debts and stressed loans turning into non-performing assets have been noticed quite regularly in recent years. However, it has now reached alarming levels as these non-performing assets are now being written off as bad debts by the government. According to a report in the Indian Express today, 29 public sector banks wrote off a total of rupees 1.14 lakh crores of bad debts between 2013 and 2015. This is half the amount of rupees 2.11 lakh crores written off between 2004 and 2015. The alarming rise in bad debts between 2013 and 2015 at 60% compared to just 4% between 2004 and 2012 is a cause for serious concern. What does this mean to the banking sector? Why have bad loans risen so dramatically in the last 2 years? What measures has RBI and the government taken to curb the dramatic rise in bad loans? These and many other questions have cropped up following these disclosures. We will discuss all this today with Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor and also former Under Secretary General of the United Nations, Mohan, Guruswamy, Senior Economist, Prof. Arun, Kumar, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU, Renu, Kohli, former staff member, RBI and IMF, and US Bhargava, former Chief General Manager, Punjab National Bank. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Bhargava, is this something which we can call alarming? What we have seen, your former bank, the Punjab National Bank, comes second in this list.
Yes, it is very much alarming, and there are various reasons for it, both for creation of the bad loans as well as addressing the menace. Because in case of the loans which are going bad, we linger on with those bad loans for a very long time, and many of the assets created with the help of the bank loans remain unutilized or partially utilized because of the ineffective management. And we all know that courts take a very long time, and especially the persons who can afford to linger on the cases in the courts, they move from one court to the other, and it takes many years for resolution of the case. And therefore, probably what we are talking today is the immediate requirement of the passage of the bankruptcy law, or as otherwise it is said that it is being planned that Reserve Bank of India and government together may create an ARC which may purchase all the existing bad loans and address them effectively by giving those the companies which are not being run by the present management, by giving them to the professionals who may run them on professional lines, and they may be given preset targets that in case they reach those targets, then in that case they will be allowed a good amount of equity to them. And as is happening in case of many of the family-run businesses also, today this is a normal trend that the major day-to-day functioning is handed over to the professionals, and they are in a position to better carry on the working of the company.
Sorry.
This is how these loans also, which are stuck up and are not being run properly by the management, can be taken care of.
Mr. Bhargava, why is it that in the last 2 years, especially these bad loans have gone up so dramatically, and writing off these bad loans, at what level are these decisions taken?
See, there are two reasons. One is the market. Naturally, we all are observing and hearing that the markets are not functioning properly, and there can be a genuine difficulty with the companies for not doing well because of the market not supporting them. But the another problem is that there was a tendency on the part of the banks also to evergreen the loan accounts, and therefore they were not reflected properly. But now with the Governor Reserve Bank of India taking a very strong stance of not permitting the evergreening and making the proper disclosure and thereafter proper provisioning, etc., now the banks are probably compelled to come out with the real numbers, and therefore this sudden jump is seen during the last 2 years.
Okay. Mr. Desai?
Yeah.
How do you see this?
No, I think first let's take it in proportion.
Right.
One, as he said, One reason for this is this goal that by March 17, the balance sheets of banks must be cleaned up. And this is what Ragurajan has been insisting on. And one of the reasons we will get this increase is that. But that's not obviously the only reason. Part of the reason is also what's happening in the economy, the slowdown, etc. And but it's a good thing. But it's better to write off than to do what the banks were doing, which is what called extend and pretend, which is give the guy another loan to repay his old loan, so his loan keeps mounting, and at some point he loses interest in even servicing the loan because it's cheaper for him to default. I think this is certainly, incidentally, one of the questions I would ask Mr. Bhargava is why is there such a big difference between the percentage of assets in public sector banks and the private sector banks? The private sector bank NPA ratio is about half of what the public sector bank is. Now, why is this? Is there something wrong in the decision-making process that leads to this big difference? They're operating in the same market, subject to the same economic conditions.
Mr. Bhargava, would you like to react to that quickly?
I'll only be too happy to take this question.
Please.
Because, in case of the public sector banks, many of the loans are required to be made because of the various compulsion, and one compulsion is that of the social banking. The other day, Deputy Governor, Reserve Bank of India, Mr. Gandhi also has come out with this observation that in case the banks are required to make the loans taking into account the social consideration, probably the entire culture changes. The banker also knows that whatever loans we are making in the social banking arena, there it is, the thrust is not very much on the capability of the person to run the business, but it is just to help out the persons concerned. And since they are required to make these loans in quite a good number, therefore culture itself gets distorted.
Okay.
In case these public sector banks also are permitted to work strictly on the commercial lines, then I think they will be able to generate that much of profitability that probably they will give a good amount of dividend to the bank, to the government, and the government will be able to make budgetary provisions for taking care of whatever is being done through the social banking.
Okay, sir. I think your point is well taken. But Mr. Professor Arun Kumar, is it social banking which is creating these kind of problems?
No.
Because we have seen the kind of corporate debt which is which is causing this.
You know, so my take would be that actually crony capitalism operates within the entire structure. There is a lot of political interference in the way loans are given, and the government's policies have to be backed up. So the government wants infrastructure to be backed up, then, infrastructure loans will be given.
Infrastructure is supposed to be the biggest.
Right. That's why I'm particularly naming infrastructure, with the large, bad debts and NPAs coming from that sector. And when the government takes up a certain policy decision, then it expects public sector banks to back them up. Not only public sector banks, but also other financial institutions. And then there has been a tendency since 1991 that to show good performance of the stock market, financial institutions are expected to do that. And that's why the UTI had collapsed, if you remember, in the late 1990s, because they ended up with a lot of bad financial portfolios. The banks also have something similar taking place in their case. So in other words, the government, to push its policy, is doing that. So otherwise, the banks do not have the autonomy to go in. Now, as a result of that, what happens is that there are some weak companies and the banks begin to invest there. Okay, because of the political pressure. So that's also part of the crony capitalism, and that's what happened to other financial institutions also, that companies that had very low valuation, the government expected the companies to buy them up, and therefore later on they collapsed. So in other words, the government is expecting the public sector banks to act counter-cyclically. If the economy is going down, then the banks, the other financial institutions, they're expected to intervene. And that then leads to problems later on, because then those assets, and that also promotes corruption, because then which companies will be backed, which companies will not be backed, comes under political pressure. So large part of the bad debt, large part of the NPAs is a result of the fact that the government and the political leadership back certain companies, back certain kind of loans, and those loans then turn into bad debts and NPAs.
So, Mohan, you agree that this is a crony capitalism which is creating these problems, or is there more to it also?
No, there's more to it. What he was saying was social banking and, government pushing its policies. There's nothing wrong government pushing its policies. Government is expected to push its policies. But this is not government policy to lend money to crooks, to lend money to non-existent companies. This is what's happening. This is undeclared government policy. This is actually what happens really full-time in the Department of Banking and in the Finance Ministry, is to foster this crookery. Now, you've got loans given to non-existent companies. You've got evergreening of loans. You've got recycling of loans. You know, if you look at some of the top 10 companies, debtors, 1.5 lakh crores, NPAs, the biggest company.
Yes.
And, you know, all the top 10 business houses.
But
7 of them are there.
But no,
And, and they are the guys who go with the Prime Minister on delegations. They are the guys who are consulted by the Finance Minister for the new budget.
Mohan, today's Indian Express report very clearly mentions they wanted to know who are the major defaulters.
And the bank said, we don't know.
No, who's, yeah. You know,
Bank said,
RBI said
we don't have data
on that. You know, of course they know.
Otherwise the data is available.
You know, the data is available.
I
Except
think
that
one of the things arising from this, one of the things I think is important, they've done a lot of classification of loans.
Yes.
I would distinguish between those cases where the loan is bad because of general economic conditions. For instance, a lot of some failures of government policy. For instance, the loans which have been given to the state electricity boards are not crony capitalism. That is something which affects all of
That's fair enough.
Plus, but distinguish those from the cases where that guy is in trouble, but the other guys are not.
Right.
You see? Now,
but Nitin, here...
That is a case where you have to really not treat that person in the same way.
The problem is, are there verifiable details coming out with, verifiable...
Of course there are verifiable details. The details are all available.
Why is it that the RBI says that we don't have this?
I don't know why the RBI said they don't have it, because it's there. The newspapers are publishing the names of these guys. You know, the
other day,
All India Bank Employees
all of
Association
them,
had
everybody is
brought out
publishing. Credit Suisse brought out a paper.
Yeah, but why not why can't we get government information on this? Authentic information, because otherwise we are depending on other sources, not the actual. Okay, Renu, what is your response to it? The role of the RBI also in this.
Yeah.
It is said that in the last 1 year there has been substantial erosion in the valuations of the public sector banks. They have all public sector banks together. This is a very interesting information. All public sector banks put together, their valuation is half of the top private sector bank in this country. What has happened? And how is it that the RBI is overlooking these things?
Well, valuation itself is a function of the economic health or the soundness of a bank. And therefore, it's not surprising that the valuation is going down, because the proportion of bad loans is going down, and hence it is affecting return on assets and profitability. But I would like to respond to the discussion preceding this question, which was about lending and the nature of lending and whether these loans, what are the reasons. I think one way to look at it and to distinguish the impact of economic conditions upon the bad loans is to look at it at times when the economic cycle has been on the upswing and growth has been good, and at a time like this in recent years when the economic cycle we are facing a downturn. So if you see, the gross and net NPAs both were pretty stable between roughly between the period from 2005-06 right up to 2010 and 11. If I am correct, if I'm not mistaken, then gross NPAs were under in the range of 2 to 2.5%, all scheduled commercial banks, and net NPAs were actually below 1.5% in the aggregate. And now both these numbers are steadily rising for the last 2-3 years.
Why? Why is the question?
In April 2012, the RBI itself, well, I think that tells us what is the impact of macroeconomic conditions. Because were the loans all made to crooks, or were all these false or bogus loans, then we would probably, that differential perhaps can tell us what is the impact of economic conditions. Because it is well known that bad loans are a function of the economic cycle. There is a bit of a lag. Now, in April 2012 itself, the Reserve Bank's own assessment, as disclosed by as stated by one of its deputy governors then, Mr. Anand Sinha, was that they said that NPAs have bottomed out, but they haven't. Now, what has happened since 2012-13? 2 or 3 things. One is that monetary tightening increased. It went up by 75 BPS, and obviously that is pushing up interest costs, and hence the debt servicing capabilities or capacity of many of these firms who might have borrowed. And it's not just infrastructure loans. The concentration of bad loans is not just in infrastructure. There is iron and steel. Globally, that is an industry which is struggling. Mining, all natural resources prices have collapsed, and textiles. So, there are genuine economic conditions underlying all this. So it would be, I think it would be, to take a reasonable view, one should be take a more nuanced look at it.
Okay.
The worry at this point is that they are not stabilizing. Even when the RBI said in April 2012 they have bottomed out, they haven't, they are still rising. And
that's exactly the point.
That's a concern.
That's exactly the point, Renu. Yes, Professor.
What I want to say is that, you see, the downturn took place in 2007-8. And yet the NPAs did not rise dramatically till 2012.
That's
so
right.
That's one. Second is
exactly
why government's data suggests that in the last 2 years there's been an upturn. The rate of growth has gone up to 6.5%, 7.5%. Even though there are doubts about it, but we find the bad loans are increasing, NPAs are increasing. The point is that, you see, in a downturn, it's true that there'll be more companies which will have problems, therefore there'll be more NPAs, etc. But the point that I was trying to make was that in a general condition, where the government intervention is there what happens is that the banks take advantage of that through crony capitalism. Politicians take advantage of that, and then they begin to push. So it's absolutely right, as Nitin said, the state electricity boards is not that problem.
Yeah, and some of the points which Renu made about genuine economic reasons.
I think for us to treat this problem as if it is entirely due to malfeasance on the part of banks does not do it justice. There must be a distinction drawn in terms of policy between cases where things have happened because of sector-wise conditions and cases where it has happened because of poor judgment.
The problem, sir, is how much. Where are the reports there? Where are the evidence for us to make the distinction?
The banks know it, and you see, basically here, Raghuram Rajan did suggest that first. He says to look at it when you start doing it, besides write-off, it must also include infusion of promoter equity. And where it's a sector-wise problem, the appropriate government policies to resolve the sector-wise problem. So I would, for instance, the sort of thing which they're trying now with the state electricity boards. So I would say that we should take, as Renu is saying, a more nuanced view, and we should not condone crony capitalism, and there are obvious cases. We don't even need to name them cases.
Sir, Mohan, one second. There is this parliamentary committee, standing committee, finance standing committee parliamentary report, which says that willful defaulters owe public sector banks 64,335 crores, which constitutes about 21% of total NPAs. 64,000 crores, willful, these are, which the parliamentary committee is saying. So.
True, that is part of it. You see, when public sector, power distribution companies, etc., electricity boards default or they go bad, the state governments pick it up, they give guarantees, the central government gives guarantees. It is not reflected in this top 10. This top 10 consists of only private companies. And
exactly.
What you're having is evergreening of loans. Why more NPAs are being declared now is because the RBI has come out with fresh guidelines forcing them to declare NPAs, forcing them to say that certain loans are stressed. Now, this Credit Suisse list of the 10 top companies are stressed companies,
absolutely.
Which means they have to borrow more to keep servicing their debt.
I have that list, but since this list is not, is not an official list, we can't discuss these numbers. But the point is that how do they, Mr. Desai, who decides that the bank these loans should be written off?
No, it's not a question of who the writing off of a loan can only be part of a credit restructuring program, not of some where you are basically taking hold of an asset under the law, the surfarency law, as we call it. It's only when you feel that by restructuring this, one can retrieve this company. And this is a judgment which has to be made. And this is where the RBI has said it's not just writing off. It must include an element of infusion of equity by the promoter, and where it's a sector problem, also appropriate policies by the government. So in that sense, they are looking at it, I believe, in a reasonably rational way. I would say that it's not a bad idea if the truth comes out.
But if there is going to be restructuring, You don't see any restructuring in India.
That is
The same
exactly
companies get more. Restructuring means more debt. Restructuring, to my
Bhargava,
mind,
not necessarily.
means
Mr.
that
Bhargava.
you throw the managements out or get new management.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Sell,
I like
sell
to
bad
make one or
parts
two
of the
points.
business. Nothing of that sort happens. The same groups have the same bunch of companies and they get more money.
Mr. Bhargava, how, this restructuring, how is this restructuring? Are these, when you're talking of writing off of bad loans, who decides one, and is it part of the restructuring? How successful are these restructuring at all?
There is a mixed feeling, and in some cases, genuine restructuring has been there, but in some cases, just to avoid classification into NPA category,
Right.
the accounts are being restructured, and now that is landing the economy in a situation where the assets created either are not fully optimally utilized, or in many cases they are not put to use at all. I have personal experiences where the a good number of machineries have been installed and they have not been put to use even for a day. Now it's a loss to the entire economy itself. So as far as the existing bad loans are concerned, 2-3 important things are there. One, the bankruptcy law should come as early as possible so that the assets are put to proper use once the existing management goes out. And second is, in case that there is a plan to create that ARC by the government and Reserve Bank of India, which will be able to take such assets in hands and give it to the professionals. These two steps probably will be helping the country a lot. And then in case the organizations like CIBIL, etc., Credit Information Bureau of India Limited, wherein now it has been made mandatory for the banks to pass on the information to CIBIL, and while making a new loan, it is necessary for the bank to find out from CIBIL the standing of the promoters, the standing of the company and all these things from CIBIL, and thereafter only make the fresh loans. And one more point I like to make, when I was referring to social conflict between social banking and commercial banking, I had referred to the culture. You see, the persons in the bank are same, who are doing the working for the social banking, and they only are required to work for the commercial banking.
Right.
Now, in case you put them in a situation where in their mind they are carrying a particular mindset, they are required to work for the social banking, and they cannot wipe it off overnight when they are required to take care of the commercial banking.
Yes, sir. The point is taken, well taken, understood. Renu, what is it that the RBI can do now, in such cases? Or are you, in the previous, when you were saying, or you think that this kind of write-off which is happening is a good thing?
Well, write-off as a way of treating bad loans amongst other options has always been there. So it's not a new thing. What is important is to see is what percentage or what fraction is being written off. So that is not clear. From the financial stability reports of the RBI, where the NPA positions is often reported on a half-yearly basis, it does not seem that the write-offs are inordinately high as a fraction of the total NPAs. What the RBI is, so it is a position and that the banks take. It's a judgment that the banks exercise. And as Mr. Desai said, it's not a bad thing in itself. The bank's balance sheets have to be cleaned up, and one has to find a solution to move ahead.
So is this the way?
And, if these are genuine loans, they are irrecoverable.
Renu,
Business
sorry.
has gone bad. In fact,
Renu, sorry to intervene. So is this the way forward? In the next, Desai was talking about 2017, which the RBI is very clear, is very keen to have a clean balance sheets of banks. So is this what we are going to see in the coming weeks and months?
Yes.
Also, more and more bad loans being written off?
We will have to see how it pans out, because there is beginning to be the NPAs are now going to rise, obviously, and the last quarter results of some private sector banks reported quite a big jump. Not just private sector, even SBI. And reportedly, in the commentary that they gave while presenting the results, there was a kind of a difference of opinion between the regulator and the concerned banks themselves. The banks themselves did not consider these restructured advances as to be treated as NPAs, but apparently the RBI said they were to be treated as non-performing assets.
Okay.
So there is some kind of disagreement as appears evident. But in the case of further deterioration in macroeconomic conditions, the RBI's own projection shows that by March 2017, these could rise to something like 6.9% by March 2017. So a lot depends on the macroeconomic cycle, whether the cycle turns up or conditions deteriorate even further.
Okay, Mohan.
So the way forward is unclear.
Okay, Mohan, the corporate debt restructuring, I mean, that seems to be one of the solutions which they continue to talk about. The parliamentary panel has clearly said that it has failed. The mechanisms involved in this corporate debt restructuring has failed. So are we going to use the same mechanism and still go ahead? How are you going to resolve these problems?
There are one basic institutional flaw in this. You can't have restructuring because the Department of Banking is under the Finance Ministry. The Finance Ministry is an actively political ministry. It interferes with the Department of Banking day-to-day basis. Who's to be sanctioned loans, who's not to be sanctioned loans.
Who's to be appointed.
Who's to be appointed. Even chairmen are appointed by the Finance Ministry and then it goes to the Prime Minister. All this is a political process in which businessmen have candidates. They make people executive directors. They make people chairmen. These are all dangerous. So the thing to do is to delink the Finance Ministry, the banking department, and delink the banks from the banking department.
Mr.
That has to be...
Is that the way out?
The banking department is responsible for the public sector banks, and I think there's a lot to be said for treating the public sector banks exactly as a private sector. Private sector banks don't fall under the banking department.
And
the banking department is exercising the functions of the government as owner. The regulator of banks is the Reserve Bank of India, not the Finance Ministry.
Right.
And is not. But the fact is that they have the control over the ownership structure. So I would say that one of the reforms I would certainly wish to see, which is not in the hands of Raghuram Rajan, but only in the hands of the government, is to have an arm's length thing. In fact, consider the possibility of abolishing
84% of the
abolishing what?
The Department of Banking.
Department of Banking.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd suggest that in addition to this, the autonomy has to be made effective, where policy that the government has need not be backed up by its pressure on the banking sector. If subsidies are required, subsidies should be given out of the budget rather than the banks made to subsidize it, because that is what is misused in a sense. I've seen cases where the government is pushing that you finance these kind of things, and then the banks particularly choose bad ones for political reasons. So that aggravates the situation. So that's not the primary cause, but it aggravates the situation. So I'd say that whenever, say, like the infrastructure policy, we know that in a poor country like India, infrastructure requires a lot of subsidy, otherwise it's not viable in the market, whether that be in the power sector, whether it be in the transport sector or other sectors. So you have to de-link these policies from the pressure on the banking sector that they have to finance all this.
Okay. So Mr. Bhargava, very quick last words to you. What is the solution?
See, I'm already emphasizing that fine, we are now talking about writing off, impact of writing off and all these things, but in case at the same time, whatever assets have been created, if they are today also put to effective use, whatever we suffer because of the writing off, probably partly that will be taken care of by putting these assets which have already been created to a proper use and in an effective manner. Because in case of the, we were also talking about the abolition of the banking division.
Yes.
Now this is happening in the private companies also. There, the promoters are leaving everything up to the professionals.
Okay.
Similarly, banking department, if abolished, and everything is left up to the professionals, this will work fine.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. On that note, we'll end. We have some of the best minds on this issue on our panel. They have made certain suggestions. Hopefully, the government will take note of it. And this is a problem which, according to some of our panelists, we will keep seeing more and more in the coming weeks and months. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, The Big Picture, same time tomorrow.